time. It's our time, my friends. Time for millions of maturepreneurs, 55 plus, who are hashtag not done by a long shot, to revolutionize how we lead, do business, and innovate our world. I'm your host, Jeanette Anderson, and welcome to my conversations with fascinating people who would rather inspire than retire. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Maturepreneur Podcast. I am so excited to have the wonderful one and only Holly Bertone here. I forgot to ask you if that's how you pronounce your last name.
It is, yes.
Okay. Phew, I got lucky there. And today we're going to be discussing how to craft or create your comeback story. So comebacks are something that we have all been through. Hopefully you've made it back from wherever you've come, whatever you've come through. And why is it, we weren't going to talk about why it's so important to craft that comeback story and how do you overcome a lot of the adversities that come along in life, because we all deal with them. And one of the advantages of getting older is it means you've gone through more things to overcome. And that gives us more good stories. So it's a good cycle. All right. So welcome, Holly. Tell me where you're located right now.
Oh my goodness. Thanks so much, Jeanette, for such a fun introduction. And yeah, I'm so excited to be on the show. And I'm calling in from Pennsylvania. I just like to say the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. I spent the last 20 years living in Washington, D.C. suburbs in Alexandria, Virginia. So moved back to close to my hometown after a divorce. So it's a different pace. It's nice to be a little bit slower pace of life right now.
Awesome. Well, and yeah, it's a different pace than Washington, D.C. for sure. That is a very busy, happening city. All right, folks, I'm going to read you Holly's official bio. Then we're going to talk about the real juicy, deep, dark secrets behind that bio. And even though if you saw her, you would see that woman can't have possibly have deep, dark secrets. But and then we're going to dive into our topic. So Holly Bertone is a midlife comeback coach, motivational speaker, #1 Amazon bestselling author, and the host of the Your Comeback Story podcast. Holly spent 20 years in consulting and federal government services, primarily at the FBI, where she was a chief of staff. After struggling with breast cancer, autoimmune disease, and debilitating chronic fatigue, she created a unique methodology to heal herself. Holly combines the principles of performance and mindset to coach successful women who are stressed out and burned out to unleash their comeback stories so that they can ditch exhaustion and achieve optimal health and performance. So cool. Okay, so first of all, before I ask you to tell us something about you we wouldn't guess, we got to talk about being the chief of staff at the FBI. So what did that include?
Oh my goodness. It was a dream career since I was probably 17 years old in high school. And this was before Silence of the Lambs came out. And I wanted to work there. I have a pug and his name is Hannibal. So if you find that funny, like you're my person.
I think that's hilarious.
Yeah. So but yeah, what's crazy though is I was a data nerd. So I was in project management and a chief of staff. So I wasn't an agent. I didn't do anything, too crazy. But when I was a little girl, one thing I loved to do was we had this huge dining room table and I would take 3 different jigsaw puzzles, like 500, 1,000 piece puzzles, dump them out, mix them up, and then put them back together. Like total nerd alert.
Yeah, so puzzle's not complicated enough.
Right. So, but what I found is that I know when we were talking before we hit record, you're talking about kind of the through line. And when I was at the FBI, that's exactly what I did. And this was post 9/11. So it was after the 9/11 commission report, after the WMD commission report. And there were several different national security offices that I helped to stand up. So we're taking disparate pieces of the FBI, trying to bring them together into, one cohesive program. And I did that. I lost count, I don't know, 4 or 5 or 6 times. And then they just decided to make me chief of staff of my own office because I guess I did it good enough. And then we ran some data analytics, which was a lot of fun to be able to look at the trends and what some of the agents were doing and some of the threats and things like that. So it was a lot of fun to be in that space. And interestingly enough, and people were like, okay, FBI to holistic health coach and comeback coach. But that's exactly what I do now as a coach is look at, someone and look at all of the disparate pieces of their life and say, let's get you whole. Let's come back to you again. And let's figure out how these pieces all fit back together. So it's still the same through line.
Okay. Well, kind of. It does seem like a fair jump, but yep, how to get the disparate pieces back together makes sense, especially in line with your puzzle story. So let's do find out that little fact or tip that people wouldn't guess besides the fact that you were in the FBI, because honest to God, you look like you haven't even got out of college yet. I don't know error, right? But okay, so tell us something about you that we wouldn't guess, or maybe even your friends don't know.
Oh my goodness. I do have a few skeletons. I don't know if I necessarily want to air, air them.
Well,
But
those are the most fun. That's the whole point.
I know but when you say though, like people they don't think that I'm 53 years old.
Right.
And it's just I'm a walking testament to my own brand and what I do. And just, being able to stay young, youthful appearance, metabolic health, all of the things. So I appreciate the compliment. Thank you. But that is one thing when people see me, they, don't think that I'm that old.
Yeah.
But I guess the weirdest thing, the one thing that I like to do when we play the game, I can wiggle my ears.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, and you mentioned the play the game, of like, oh, okay, what's your stupid human trick or whatever.
Yeah.
I have yet to be beat in the who's had the weirdest job question. I
Oh
Because
my goodness. So what was yours?
oh, I have a list of them. I was a stick, what they call a stick, in a carnival. I would get paid money to go and bet at the horse kind of gambling wheel in the carnival, the traveling carnival. I was a mystery woman at a sideshow in a traveling carnival. I don't know what they saw when they went inside, but I just stood on or sat on stage in a black cape and a black pillowcase over my head, being mysterious. And the barker would talk all about the mystery woman will amaze and impress you, and you will have to, you'll be, wowed. And I don't know what they saw inside, but anyway, I trained phone sex operators as my very first training job. That was
Oh
a
my goodness.
yeah, and then more. I've driven D8 cats. I've done all sorts of different kinds of things that are really weird. So, yeah, I love playing those games of who's got the weirdest or the whatever. What things do people not guess or about you? So tell me a little bit about your why. Why do you do this work? Why does it matter to you so much?
I really think my why is back to adversity and something that, and I know you said the older we get, the more life,
Mhm,
happens, the more life gets lifey. And I think really that purpose and that passion comes from adversity.
mhm,
And my mother had some chronic health challenges her entire life. And her life mantra was it builds fortitude.
mm,
And I always thought that it meant just, kind of staying strong through the challenges of life. And I'm realizing as I do get older and, especially in my coaching practice and what I do and the women that I serve, and I'm realizing that fortitude isn't about how it's not about that pushing through. It's not about the willpower. It's not about just, oh, I'm just going to stay strong. It's about, like I see in the background, you've got your palm trees. It's about being that strong tree in the hurricane. you know, and it's being able to be flexible and agile and to be okay with the failures in life, to know how to pick yourself up, to know how to learn from the lessons and to move on. And that's really, you know, my purpose and my passion is from that. It's, you know, from being bullied as a child to, we, you know, we could get into my story, but, you know, being bullied as a child and then going through breast cancer and autoimmune disease and debilitating chronic fatigue and divorce. And, you know, it just, like you say, you get older and the life events just keep happening. And I, you know, and I see every single adversity gets easier and easier. It doesn't take away how painful it is, but the darkness isn't as deep,
Mm.
and the length of that time of sorrow isn't as long.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Thank God. Yeah, that's one of the biggest, I think, benefits of getting older is that that stuff doesn't take as long to move through and is not as, we don't buy the story that this is forever and I'm, you know, and always and forever and never and all of those stories. We just know that this too will pass. So tell us your story. So that sounds like a lot. And by the way, life gets lifey. I love that line. That should be on a t-shirt. I,
I attributed that, my podcast producer actually came up with that one. I don't know where she got it, but I was like, oh,
oh, it's
totally use
great.
that. Mhm.
Yeah, this is just life getting lifey is a new t-shirt in my,
Yeah.
we can see. Okay, so tell me about your life getting lifey. How did you come to this work?
Yeah. So I always like to start the day before my 39th birthday because that was the day that everything was still normal. I was racing in Xterra triathlons and they're off-road triathlons. I was the only civilian on Quantico's Marine Corps mountain bike team. So I was racing mountain bikes with the big strong Marines, and just, you know, I chief of staff traveling everywhere. And I like, that was that moment in time that everything was quote unquote perfect.
Mhm.
And on my 39th birthday was the day that I was actually diagnosed with breast cancer.
Mm,
And I went through the surgery and the chemo and the radiation and all of the things. And what happened was that I didn't get better.
mm,
And all the girls in support group, they're out running those 5K pink ribbon races. And I'm like, I can't get out of bed. Something's wrong with me. My doctor's like, no, 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 you're going to be fine. I'm like, no, something's wrong. And 1 year later, finally, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, which then years later turned into debilitating chronic fatigue. So, in
mm,
the course of about 7 or 8 years, it was just one health challenge on top of another. And, you know, at 39, 40, in my early 40s, you know, I was an 80-year-old woman.
mm,
And, you know, I got to a point where, you know, my body was at an age, I was twice my age. And I'm like, this is not okay. I had a young stepson. I was married at the time. And I realized that life should not be lived this way.
mm,
And I didn't know what to do, but I knew that if I took responsibility, if I stopped looking at this from life just happened, if I stopped looking at this from a place of poof, disease just showed up, and I took responsibility for my life and my health, that maybe I'll figure things out. And like they always say, when the student's ready, the teacher appears. So, and I was in such bad shape. I mean, I was forced to resign from my dream job at the FBI. That's how bad it was. And they say, when the student's ready, the teacher appears. And I was in such bad shape, I had two teachers.
okay.
Yeah, I said I was such an overachiever that I hit rock bottom 3 times with my health. And I needed so much help that I needed two teachers. And yeah, I figured out how to, it took years, but I figured out how to heal myself. And that was such a profound journey because when it started with my physical health. And I'm like, okay, I have a symptom. I need to figure out how to get rid of the symptom. I have migraines all of the time. I need to figure that out. I have IBS. I need to figure that out. Like all of this stuff and looking at it from that physical perspective. And what I realized that the physical was only part of it, that a lot of it was that, kind of emotional, spiritual, all of the stuff that you don't see.
Mhm.
And when I started focusing on that, that's when the needle started to move. And I was like, oh yeah. And in the FBI, that's what they call a clue.
All right.
So yeah, so I became a health coach and yeah, the rest is history.
I really appreciate and am very amused by the overachievers being applied to. I'm such an overachiever. I had to hit rock bottom 3 times. Like, you're an overachiever when.
When exactly, tell me you're an overachiever without telling
Yeah,
me you're an
exactly.
overachiever.
And the two teachers. So who were they, and how did they come to you?
So one was a functional chiropractor and the other one was an energy healer,
Okay.
both of which I had visceral reactions to. I thought it was like weird woo woo stuff and had no interest in either of them. And that was a big lesson that I learned is that when, you have these big reactions to things, oftentimes it's because there's some big stuff on the other side.
Yeah, exactly. And so you started your healing journey in terms of exploring different modalities and different ways of looking at it, and also looking at it more holistically, that it just wasn't about the cells and the physicality, it's also about the mind and the heart and the spirit. So what did you start to shift? What really kind of brought it home that you made that shift to doing things differently?
You mean like what did I experience physically that was different
What what
or?
was what was the what was the turning point for you to really step onto that healing path? What made you go from, okay, here's all the traditional stuff, and I'm now going to take charge of my well-being?
I think it was just too many years of not getting better.
Mm,
And just, I mean, I was still, quote unquote young. And I'm like, I just can't live like this. And every doctor that I went to dismissed me. They're like, oh, there's nothing I can do for you. And then I started going to functional doctors and spent a lot of money. And then that end result was them kind of shrugging their shoulders and saying, I can't do anything for you. But and you go back to like, okay, you get a paper cut. Well, your finger heals, a few days later, never even knew it was there. Okay, well, why can't my body heal in other places? So it was just the determination and the curiosity to experiment. But then it took years because I didn't have a path and I had two great teachers, but I also didn't have like someone who could just kind of walk me through everything from point A to point B. So, so a lot of it was a lot of trial and error. A lot of it was a lot of failure. And a lot of it was just not seeing any progress and really, back to the fortitude, just, being able to pick myself back up, even when I wasn't seeing any progress. And I realized the through line of that is like, that's our life journey. It
mm,
doesn't have to be with your health. It can be with your relationships, your finances, your business, your career, your everything.
mhm.
Is that the one thing is common is that the suffering is universal,
Yeah.
but we get to make a decision how we show up when the suffering happens, when the failures happen, when the setbacks happen, when Murphy's law seems to just Murphy law itself to death. And we get to make that decision of how we want to show up
Yeah.
and what we want our lives to look like. And for me, I like to call it radical responsibility, but really it's just the ability to respond.
Mhm.
And I think so often, and especially in today's culture, unpopular opinion, so many people like to blame others or not take that responsibility, or kind of say, well, it's this thing over here and it's not, not with me. And well, yeah, if I want to get better, I got to figure this out. I can't rely on a doctor that's just shrugging their shoulder, or, I can't, what am I supposed to do? Be bedbound the rest of my life? So, it's really taking those bold steps. And that's what I found that sets people apart. That's what sets the people apart from the ones who see success to the ones who continue to struggle, is really taking that level of responsibility. It's not just picking yourself back up when you fall, but saying, hey, getting back up's on me.
Mm. That's another great mic drop quote. Getting back up's on me. Um, and so one of the things that I think we're specifically talking right now about a healing journey, like a physical healing journey. One of the big challenges a lot of people have is that they give a lot of their power to what I call the M deities. They think, well, they're the experts, and they are, but the pronouncements that they make may or may not be the truth of you, or the truth of your choice and decisions, and so forth. How did you, so the radical responsibility, I think, is also a really good framing. How did you not let all of that traditional medical, and even the non-traditional, the functional medical, um, not, how did you stay the course and not let it give you that sense of, oh, well, they say it's not possible, so I guess it's not possible?
Yeah, and and I always say the very first doctor, the surgeon that I met with when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, she was very well-meaning, and I know her heart was in the right place. She put her hand on my knee and she said, "Lightning struck." I mean, I'm 39 years old and diagnosed with breast, and what I thought was quote unquote healthy, realizing I actually didn't have a healthy lifestyle. Just because I was 110 pounds wasn't didn't mean I was healthy. I was anything but healthy. That's a whole different story. But she just said lightning struck. So for all of those years I just thought, poof, breast cancer just happened, and then poof, autoimmune disease just happened. And
Mm,
it took away that agency. And
mm,
again, I really believe, with all of my heart, that she meant well, that she wanted to say the right thing. But
mhm,
it was such a huge disservice because I was absent from looking at what got me here. And
mm,
they talk about, whether it's cancer or any kind of disease. If you're diagnosed with one disease, you've got a 40% chance of being diagnosed with a second disease, or potentially
oh,
more. And it's not because one begets the other. It's because there's something inside of you. There's this like toxic soup that's creating this environment that's hospitable for disease.
mm,
So, but the traditional doctors don't tell you that. And, when you talk about that, you're kind of weird and woo woo. And that's why I like talking about this, because it's our body's natural ability to heal and to do the things that we can respond to, the things that we have agency over.
mm,
And had and I don't know what that conversation would have, I probably would not have been in a good place to hear it,
mhm,
at that moment in time. I don't think, when you're diagnosed with something like that, that's not the time to have a conversation about responsibility and agency.
mhm,
But I wish that it would not have taken 10 years for me to,
mm.
figure it out and get to that place.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's a time and a place for the accountability conversation. And I really love your line about, I was absent from looking at what got me here. I think that is such a brilliant and compassionate and clear way to say what a lot of people who get stuck in victim, it's just that they're absent from looking at what
Yeah.
was really going on. And um and and yeah, stuff happens, but that doesn't mean it has to take away our agency. It doesn't mean that we have to be at the effect of that. And so where did this thinking come from? Was this part of how you grew up? Was this, part of an evolution of your own personal growth? Was it your training? Where did this kind of accountable framing come from? Because it's not common.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, Jeanette, that is such a good question. And really, I think it goes back to that puzzle. being the nerdy kid putting the puzzle together and having that analytical brain that's just constantly firing, constantly looking for answers, constantly trying to put disparate pieces of the puzzle together. And I think there were quite a few years that I just gave up, that I just did not think that I could do anything. And then when I made that shift, when I realized, okay, maybe I can do something, or I don't know if I can, but I'm at least going to try.
Mhm.
And that's when these pieces started, falling into place. And, I like to think too, we ask these questions and we look for the answer. But if we don't ask the question, we're never going to find the answer.
Yeah, exactly. And so you're positioned as the comeback coach or the midlife comeback coach, and your podcast is your comeback story. So tell me a little bit about that framing on the comeback. What does that mean to you? Like when you work with clients, what's the focus there?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. This is such a good question. It's really, and I think we get to this place where, whether it's, 40, 50, 60, whatever that kind of midlife ish.
Yeah.
I've got some younger clients, I've got some older clients, and we're all experiencing the same thing. But, I think what happens is that we wake up one day and all of a sudden, we've got teenagers or grown kids or grandkids, and we're like, wait a second, I'm still like 20, 30, like in your head, you're thinking you're still 20, 30 years younger than you really are. Like your brain just kind of stops
Mhm.
at a certain age. And like that's just kind of where you think you are.
Yep.
And you're like, oh, I'm here, but I feel like I'm there, but then my body's feeling like it's 20 years older than it really is. And that's, we're in this place where, it's in business, it's called the messy middle.
Yeah.
In life, potentially it could be the messy middle with,
Yep.
career changes and, starting your own business and going through your own journey and divorces and empty nesting and grandkids and, all menopause and all of the crazy changes. Um, but it's also the most fantastic middle because you get to find yourself in that place. And really that's what the comeback is about. There's so many, and I hate is such a strong word, but the health and wellness industry is doing such a disservice
Mm.
to people by pushing agendas and, this is right and everything else is demonized.
Mhm.
And all it takes is a minute scrolling on, Instagram, or I don't do the ticky talkie, but, whatever social platform you're on. And it's just everyone's screaming at their thing is the one best way. Well, it probably works. And there's a lot of science behind a lot of the stuff and a lot of research, but it may or may not work for you. And it may or may not work for me. And on my journey, I was that person that if it was working for 90% of the people, I was the 10% that it didn't work, you know? So I'm a walking testament of, the protocols and the diets and all the stuff that the wellness industry pushes at us may or may not be great for us. So, how do we look at this? How do we approach this from an individualized perspective? How do we look at this to say, my body is a whole thing, like holistic health, and looking at it from that perspective? But there's more. It's not just my body, it's my relationships, it's my career, it's my purpose, it's my, it's all of these components that make us who we are.
Mm.
And what happens, I think, is we get to this place in life where, we now have disparate pieces,
Mhm.
and it's putting those disparate pieces back together. And that's why I like to call it the comeback story. And, I also, being born in the 70s and, kind of that late 70s, 80s movie montage and, thinking of it from that perspective, not that you're going to have your comeback story in 3 minutes, but it's about the journey.
Mhm.
And, like Rocky, 1976, the original Rocky movie, he lost the fight.
Mhm.
But would anyone at the end of that first Rocky movie call Rocky a loser? I don't think so. Right? Like he won the journey. He won
Mhm.
coming back to himself. He won who he became. And that's what we can do, whether it's our health, our lives, our careers, our businesses, whatever that looks like in our life, we can implement that comeback strategy to take these disparate pieces of our life and come back to our whole self.
Well, there was a lot in there, and I did not even remember that Rocky lost in the first movie. I've
He
watched
did.
all of the Rocky movies and all of his other movies, and I didn't remember that. That's fascinating because, of course, he's positioned as such a champion, right?
Yeah.
And and champions lose fights,
Yeah.
but not the franchise.
And
And
I actually, just a fun side note, the other weekend, I actually went to Philadelphia and I got to run up the stairs. It was so much fun.
That's awesome. That's so cool.
Yeah.
I would be walking up slowly, but I could get there. I could get there. The concept of this messy middle, I love it, and it reminds me. I'm reading a book right now called "This Chair Rocks: The Manifesto Against Ageism" by Ashton Applewhite, and it's fascinating, and fabulous. But one of the things she talks about is the fact that statistically there's a happiness you, and that we are the happiest when we are very young and very old. And that it's the messy middle, that middle segment of life, that is the hardest, the most stressful, the least gratifying, the most challenged in many, many ways, because it's when we have, like you said, all those, the mortgage and the bills and the this and the that, that becomes part of that toxic soup you talked about. Um,
Mhm.
Less meaning, more have tos and shoulds,
Yeah.
and a big part of when you were talking about the comeback, I heard it two ways. I heard the comeback, like a comeback, like Rocky made a comeback. But I also heard it as come back home to who we really are,
Exactly.
to what really matters, to what we really want instead of all of those other voices.
Yes.
So it's coming back home physically,
Right.
emotionally, mentally, spiritually.
Yes.
Um,
100%.
yeah, so it's both sides of that story, and coming back home helps us make our comeback.
Yes.
Um, uh,
And I was to say, Jeanette, you brought up a really good point is, we have these demands, with our kids, regardless of what age they are, they're always,
mhm,
coming to us. And, grandkids and spouse and, career and all of these, even aging parents and community stuff and volunteer stuff. And, we've got all of these demands that are pulling us and vying for our competing for our attention. And it's like, well, where do I fit into all of this? And I think we get to a point where we we give in to the demands until we're just like, no more.
mhm.
Either we realize that we're not okay with this, or we're diagnosed with something that tells us we need to, get right with it.
Yes. Yeah. And unfortunately, it often takes that for us to stop and listen, to stop and listen and evaluate and be home, right? Because we're so busy not being home. We're being out there for everybody else and everything
Yep.
else. The Oscars were on last night, and or a while ago, if you're listening to this later. And America Ferrera, I think, was nominated for supporting actress. Barbie the movie was not, love it or hate it, whatever your thoughts are. I thought one of the most brilliant speeches was her speech in that movie. It made the whole movie for me. And it is this speech about how women in particular have these ridiculously disparate requirements of who we are. And I think
Yes.
it really gets heightened in that midlife period where we, have to be thin, but not too thin. And you can't want to be thin. You have to want to be healthy. And you have to, and she goes on and on and on about all of the various components of it. And she's done is like Man, it's amazing we get out of bed in the morning some days, because like that is a tall order. So if you haven't heard it, go to YouTube and listen to the America Ferrera's speech in Barbie. Um, and it personifies, I think, some of this challenge that we come up against in this middle stage. So you mentioned a comeback strategy. How do you get out of that messy middle? How do you come back home? What are some things that you work with clients to help them figure out what that strategy is? And when you said comeback strategy, I thought, well, of course she's got a strategy. She's a very analytical as well as very passionate and heart-based and stuff. So tell us about the comeback strategy components.
Yeah, I was gonna say I like to vary the right and left brains.
Yeah.
But so yeah, I was gonna say let's go through what I like to call the Rocky framework.
Okay.
And it's I do this for podcast interviews because it's so much fun. In my program, we go through the same framework. It's just called something different. But for this, it's just fun. I love the Rocky framework.
Okay.
And what I think the biggest mistake is that when we decide that we are ready to make that comeback, when we're ready to say, okay, I'm ready for something different, I'm ready to come back home to myself,
Uh-huh.
what happens is that we start from the go button. Again, whether health, life, career, doesn't matter. We start from the go button. We start from tell me what to do and I'm just going to go do it. And what happens is that we were creating that comeback story from that place of where we're currently at. So if we're in that place of demanding schedules, if we're in that place of frustration, anger, fear, anxiety, resentment, jealousy, any of this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and we try to create a future self from that place, that future self is going to look an awful lot like that current self.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is the thing that no one wants to talk about. Everyone wants to give strategies and everyone wants to say this is how to do it. But for me and my program, I actually like to go backwards. So the first thing we do is R, and that's rear view mirror. And that's actually make peace with your past, to look at everything that's happened up until this point and be in a place of peace and forgiveness with others and forgiveness with yourself. And I
Mm-hmm.
think when you can come to that place of peace, it opens your heart to a pure place to eventually then, go forward and do the things that you want to do. The O is own your ship, that is with a P like a boat, keeping it G rated. And that's exactly, what we talked about with personal responsibility. We talked about that. I don't need to go into that more.
Yep.
The C is create your future self. So this is when we start the doing and having fun and doing things, like the goal setting and habit stacking and, manifesting and visualization and all of the things. But back to, kind of what we were talking about with individualized wellness is goal setting and creating that future self is kind of in that same fallacy of it's not a one size fits all,
Mm-hmm.
and coming up with a strategy to get you from point A to point B that is going to fit within your lifestyle, especially if you have a lot of demands going on, that it does fit into your lifestyle. It's not someone else's strategy that you're trying to cookie cutter, back into yourself. So I think that's a very important, thing to think about too, when you do hit that go button, that you're not just blindly following someone's strategy, that you're like, okay, how can I implement this with my current life schedule, demands, everything like that. And the K is keep the vision, not the view.
Mm-hmm.
And this is when the obstacles come up. And it's not just, everyone wants to say, oh, I don't want any stress in my life. And that's never going to happen. It's life. And the obstacles are going to get thrown in the way. The stress is going to be there. The jerky jerks are going to be jerky jerks, and Murphy's Law is going to happen. And it's life, right? It's whatever it is, whether it's getting stuck in traffic or, a loved one passing away or whatever, big or small, it's life and it's going to happen. So it's not about getting rid of the stress. It's about coexisting with it. It's about acknowledging, hey, there's something going on, being aware of it, saying, okay, what are the lessons that I can learn from this situation? What are you here to teach me?
Mhm.
So it's not getting sucked into the vortex of being, stressed out and triggered and all the emotional craziness that goes with it. It's being fully grounded and realizing, okay, what is this here? Like, am I just supposed to feel it, or am I supposed to learn from it? Or, I kind of show up from that place of curiosity. So, so to be able to be very agile when those obstacles do happen, and to not revert back to, all the crazy
Mhm.
stress. And then the why is the you is coming back home to you. And that's, the end of your hero's journey is realizing, like the Wizard of Oz, or, any of the 80s movie montages, like you've had this inside of you all along, and it's getting rid of the gunk, and it's peeling back the layers, and it's bringing forth that truest, purest, most purposeful, aligned version of yourself. And that's really where you get to come back to yourself.
I love it. Had to play a little of the Rocky theme for you.
Oh, fun.
That was so good. I love me a good processing framework, and that's brilliant. You are a very, very, very smart woman. Okay, I love that. So let me just recap it really quick. Rear view mirror, that's the R. Own your ship or shit. Here we just call it what it is. And C, create your future self. K, keep the vision, not the view. Brilliant frame. I love that. And you come home to you. I think that's a great path for a coaching process, for a book, for a being able to really just kind of map out where you're at, where you want to go next, and to use that framework to really support you with stepping through the processing that needs to happen when you want to go from being stuck and stalled and in your stuff through to the other side, the freedom on the other side. So thank you for sharing that. I think that's really, really cool.
Thank
And I
you.
think it would probably be even more easy to apply while playing the Rocky theme. Yeah, that just goes with it. All right. So I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours,
Oh my
but
goodness.
we gotta tell people a little bit more about how they can find out about you, and tell them about your gift and how they can get that. So how can people find you and find out more about how to work with you or what you have to offer?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Jeanette. I appreciate that. And yeah, if you're listening and you're like, hey, this is kind of cool, and you want to learn a little bit more, I actually have a private podcast. And so if you're listening to this, podcast, you can listen to my private podcast. It is super easy. And basically, it's to really help you feel healthier, wake up with more energy, and perform at the highest level. So if you are feeling that burnout, if you are ready for your comeback story, then you can get this private podcast. It's a 3-part series to walk you through all of this. And it's at podcastholly.com. That's the easy to remember URL is podcastholly.com. And if you're like, wait, what was that podcast Holly was talking about? That's it. Because I know our age, sometimes I'm like, wait, what was that she was talking about?
Podcastholly.com.
Super easy. And
So
then I hang out, I was to say, and I hang out on Instagram.
okay.
So that's pretty much my social media platform of choice. And that's just my name, Holly.Bertone, Bertone. And yeah, I actually started a brand new, I shut down my old Instagram account, started a brand new one. My Instagram even had its own comeback story. So yeah, so I answer all my DMs, come say hello, and yeah, we hang out, we have fun there.
Awesome. That's really cool. And so tell people what you mean by private podcast, because not everybody knows what that is.
Oh, sure. So like this podcast, and my regular podcast is called Your Comeback Story, and that you can just listen on Apple or Spotify or pretty much any podcast player. So the
Mhm.
private podcast is you need a private code to get it. So it's not publicly available. It's a behind the scenes that you can only get with a private code.
Cool. And
Yeah.
that's an audio podcast, right?
It is an audio podcast. Uh-huh.
Awesome. I like that. And
And
so
you can listen to it on the same platform. So it's super easy.
Okay. And you do predominantly coaching work? Do you have programs? What do you do when you work with people?
Yeah, the program that I have is called Back to You.
Mhm.
Shocking. Great title, right? So yeah, so it's the Back to You program. So it's a comprehensive training program to help women in their midlife come back to themselves, to, like I said, with the energy and the health and the vitality. And there's a group coaching component, a community component, and yeah, it's a great group of women.
Lovely. Awesome. All right. So thank you so much for being here. And I want to talk to you about how we can play together more in business going forward. So don't go away right away.
Okay.
And it sounds like a lot of the work that you do is as much on the physical as it is perhaps on the metaphysical. So you do a lot of work with nutrition and the exercise and all of that as well.
Yeah, so it's really, my sweet spot is mindset.
Yeah.
And but again, it's hard to look at your health, life, and career individually. So I do look at it from a holistic perspective. So yeah, we talk about the, sleep, and actually the seven core life needs, with nutrition and movement and sleep and purpose and nature and connection and, spiritual and all of the things. But in terms of, it's the mindset piece of it
Mhm.
that is really where my specialty is, because anyone can give you a plan, but that plan's got to be right for you, and you've got to be in a right place to know what to do with it.
Right. Well, and speaking of that, as brilliant as this processing framework is, and this way to step through taking a look at where people are at, that's often very hard to do on our own. It's really in the listening of someone else, in the reflection. Just did another podcast just prior to this, and she had a brilliant line about that I'm about to butcher, but it was something to the effect of, active listening is not about mirroring back. That's a muddy mirror. It's about actually reflecting, not
Mm,
just mirroring back. And I think that this is a lot about this kind of exploration. Is a lot about having someone reflect back, not just mirror back, so that we can be seen and heard and
absolutely.
in the challenge of the messy middle, and held is capable of moving through it to the freedom on the other side. And so I
Absolutely.
love that that's what you do for people. I love that you hold that space so clearly, and that you help them sort out the three puzzles, that so that they can put the pictures together and figure out, what the view is when they've got all that confusion sorted out. So thank you so much for being here, Holly, and thank you for the work that you do. I love, love, love it. You're one of my new favorite people, and I would love to, see how we can play together more. And ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening to this, when I said, it's hard to do this on our own, to make these comebacks, to have the fortitude you were talking about, but also the perspective, the where to start, the getting out from the overwhelm, the just being heard in the challenge and the pain of it at times, so that we can move through that. And really having someone who can help you see what you can't see, because when we're in our shit, it's like it's right on the end of our nose,
Yep.
and so we need someone to help us pull that hand back so that we can see what's going on. So do reach out for support. Reach out to Holly, reach out to me, reach out to whoever you resonate with, to help you through that stage, through to the other side. It's so much easier when we have support and someone who sees us as capable, lovable, valuable, and absolutely deserving of a really good comeback story. So thank you for being that stand in the world. Holly, what's one last thing you'd like to leave everyone with?
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Jeanette, for having me on the show. And really, my one last thing is the 1%. I think as women, we can be very hard on ourselves. And, my thing is 1%, just 1% better every single day in whatever that looks like, and, whatever part of my life that looks like. And yeah, that's it. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening to this, you are part of those of us who are hashtag not done by a long shot. I commend you. I encourage you. You inspire me. Keep going. You're making a difference to how we age, how we sage, and how we live at this stage. And we need that in our world. Thanks so much. Come back again for our next awesome guest. And I look forward to meeting you in person someday soon. Bye, everybody. Thank you for listening. I'd love it if you left a comment and subscribed. And I encourage you to apply one aha from this interview right away so you can turn your wisdom into wealth and your contribution into positive change. Bye for now.